Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Katie and today we have a ScrawlrBox. Let's take a look inside, shall we? This month's featured artist is called Marta, but I can't pronounce the surname, I'm so sorry, and we have a very expressive looking portrait. I've also noticed a pad of paper which makes me very happy, and then we have these beauties. Now these are the Marabou Art crayons and we have three colours of those. We have a yellow, a purpley blue and a magenta. We also have included a Faber-Castell Gold Faber pencil in 6B, a Derwent kneadable eraser and a Royal and Langnickel Taklon brush. It looks like everyone else has had a size 4 and I've ended up with a size 2 though, judging by what's advertised in the book. We were supposed to have a sweetie this month, but that has gone missing, but I can live with that. It's Christmas, there's plenty of sweet, tasty treats around at the moment. So let's start off by swatching. First of all, the paper is quite a nice thick consistency, but is very smooth at the same time. It's quite nice. The pencil is a 6B, so it can get relatively dark and up to a reasonable lightness. The kneaded eraser is a little problematic, unfortunately. It doesn't feel like kneaded erasers I've used before. It's a bit smudgy, it felt a bit tacky as well, and it didn't matter how much I needed it just wasn't happening. And I've had Derwent ones before and I'm not a fan, but it's okay, it'll get used one way or another. Now let's talk about these Marabou Art crayons. Now I do actually already have some of these, but I don't have them in these colours, so I was super happy. And they work a little like an oil pastel, so you can draw directly onto the paper, you can smudge it with your finger, and you can activate it with some water. Obviously, if you were using oil pastels, you could do smudging and drawing directly, and you would dilute it with a oil-based medium. I'm just showing on screen the other ones that I have, and they were a little purchase actually. I think they were about $5.99 and I've had them a while, but I also have other ones I hadn't opened. I don't use the ones I'd got from Lidl, but I did want to put them on here as a comparison. I also mashed these up in a palette and I thought I could use them a little bit like a watercolour. They do dry quite flatly when they've been diluted, and when lifting the pigment off what I've sketched on the paper, it does leave a heavy amount of ghosting, but that is the nature of these crayons. Like I've mentioned, I have used them before. I tend to use them on a larger scale work just because they've got such a chunky nib. I tend to find it a little easier on a larger scale as well for smudging and just generally getting it on the surface really. I did actually find the size of the paper, and again, you know, it's only because I've had experience before with these, but I did find working on a small scale with these crayons a little tricky. Now this month's Scrawler Challenge is Expressive Expressions, and well, I didn't really give this character much of an expression, and if I be honest, I'm kind of just playing about with these in a way that I'm not used to playing about with them. I treated these initially like a watercolour. Now, lifting them from a palette where I'd ground them all in, it produced a very delicate result which would layer up eventually, and I did try and make it quite a concentrated amount, but it still came out very pale and delicate. However, in contrast to this, using them like a watercolour pencil had the complete opposite effect, and if you smudged it in with your finger first and then added the water on top just to blend it through a little bit more, the colour was so striking and so vibrant. And that kind of surprised me. When I've used them before, I've usually used them on top of a painted surface, and then it's usually been MDF as well, so it's not been massively porous. And it's smooshed around. I've never used water with them. I would just smudge them with my fingers. So yeah, using them this way, I'd never really thought about using them. I'd bought them with the intention of working over paintings beforehand. So I'm actually really glad I've got to try it this way. It's kind of extended the uses of the other ones that I've got as well. Now, I'm pretty sure, again, the issued brush for this ScrawlrBox was a size 4 and I ended up with a size 2. But that kind of worked in my favour really for the detailing. I mean, it would have been nice to have a bigger brush for the larger areas because boy oh boy, that did take a while. However, adding the facial features and shadows and tone, yeah, that worked out quite well having the little brush actually, so I'm not going to grumble at all. Now, I did try and get things as dark as possible with what I'd used from the palette, but it just wouldn't really go much darker than that. And I think the crayons must just have some sort of tolerance to the water up to a certain point when using them this way, rather than how you would use them on the paper. But I'm not going to grumble because for once I actually end up using the pencil to do a proper dark outline around the edges rather than just using it to sketch something out and then for it to be forgotten. And that's not to say that they aren't that pigmented when used this way, and they do kind of layer up to a point, but I don't know, I kind of like that. It kind of made the hair on this character very light and fluffy and airy, and yeah, I was okay with that. I even tried lifting them directly from the crayons, but there's just a certain amount. I think it must sort of cling to the paper a little bit more, which is probably why it ghosts so strongly, but again, if you smudge it around with your finger before adding the water, it does reduce that ghosting. But what I painted directly would not compare to what was put directly onto the paper. Now, does that make sense, or am I waffling a little bit here? But by adding that outline, yes, it did tile things in very nicely, and it worked out alright. She's got a bit of an odd face, but that's okay. So have any of you got this box, and what did you think of these crayons? And if you haven't had the box before but you've experienced the crayons anyway, what did you think, and do you find them useful and use them a lot? Now, I did mention that I use them on MDF for art pieces, but I also forgot to mention actually I do use them on paper, and I have used them before for life drawing. I actually find them really useful for just chucking that colour down straight away, and again smudging it in with my fingers. It's not really something I would normally use water with, but I did find them really good just to add tone and add texture, and I suppose actually they're really good for the prompts. You can actually get some really nice expressive marks down, especially on a larger surface. Anyway, I thought I would treat you all to 2 pictures because I was just really enjoying playing around with these, and I wanted to try a different approach. I wanted to try and get a really vibrant picture here, and perhaps just have more of a contrast on certain areas where I would want it pale and areas where I really wanted that colour to be. Now, I suppose if I've got to have a criticism here, it would have been really nice to have had a cool blue. However, I do kind of have a cool blue from the other set that I've got. But from a completely objective point of view, it just would have been nice to have had that bluer blue, we'll say, just because there'd be more colour mixing possibilities. However, I think the colour scheme on this picture especially worked really nice. I also tried using the crayon on a wet surface, and to be honest, they're quite slippery to work with anyway, so it didn't really feel any different, and because there's such a huge colour payoff with them anyway, I didn't really notice a massive difference in that either. So if you're curious, by all means give it a try, but to be honest, they kind of applied the same whether the paper was wet or dry. Now, one thing I did find a bit tricky was all these tiny little areas where I had to go in there and try and keep the background the same colour as the larger background. Although I didn't quite get it as vibrant and as pigmented, I did find that just by adding that crayon in certain areas of the negative space, I had a time window just big enough so that pigment would still move, but just enough there to put in that gap. I must admit though, I know I keep going on about it, and I do feel like I've perhaps waffled on a bit here. If you think I've waffled on a little bit too much, put a jellyfish or an octopus emoji in the comments. Is there even a jellyfish one? Again, I must admit, having that teeny tiny little brush was mighty useful for all these little detailed areas. And at the stage we're at now, I quite like the negative space. Part of me kind of wishes I'd just left it as it is. But then I had mixed some up in the palette, and I thought, well, I can make the most of these subtle colours and perhaps try and introduce that yellow in there too. Now I've just realised I haven't really spoken all that much about the paper. So it is the Derwent watercolour pad, and it's 300 GSM, and it's got a very smooth surface. Now I did use washi tape around the edges because I was using this a lot with the water. However, when it came to peeling it off, it did lift up a lot of the paper underneath it. It's not the end of the world, you can kind of squash it down. If you've got some paper folding tools, it's kind of useful for that as well. It can just smooth things out. I must admit though, that aside, I did really like this paper. I think if you've got any ink medium, I think that would work beautifully on there as well. It does say it is ideal for your watercolour pencils, but to be honest, I think for washes of ink, it worked fine. I didn't have much buckling with it. I don't think I had any with it actually. And yeah, I think I'd probably buy this again. The kneaded eraser, however, was not great at all. I think it felt oily actually, and if I rubbed it across the page like I would with a normal eraser, it just left these horrible scuffy marks, and when it came to rolling it across the page, it didn't lift up a huge amount that way either. I felt like I was going around dabbing areas to try and remove these horrible scuff marks. Luckily I managed to, but yeah, I wasn't massively keen on it. But that aside, I really enjoyed this ScrawlrBox, and I'm so glad I got to have some more of these Marabou art crayons to add to my collection. Now I just wanted to make the jellyfish stand out a little bit more, so I just tidied up the edges with that pencil just to make those lines a little bit more crisp. Although to be honest, the contrast between the very vibrant areas and the very light areas was enough, but why not use that pencil since we've got one. I thought it would sort of slide across the crayons whether they were diluted or not, but it did seem to work out quite nicely, so I'm not going to grumble. Anyway, there we have it. We have 2 paintings from one ScrawlrBox. Wow, and it's the last ScrawlrBox of the year as well. How crazy is that? If you've been with me for a while, why not let me know in the comments as well which your favourite ScrawlrBox of the year has been, and which of the creations I've made from them have also been your favourite too. If you're new here, why not hit that subscribe button and also check those videos out. I will leave a playlist on the screen right now with all of those lovely boxes in for you to watch. Anyway, that is it for today's video, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye!